Hello, my wonderful third graders. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We're still talking about colonial America. This is lesson 8, the Middle Colonies. Some vocabulary you will hear throughout the read aloud. Commercial means related to business, prepared for being sold, used for profit, or to become successful. Concentrated means focused on something, gave full attention to. Dependence, reliance on someone or something for support or help. Diverse means various, made up of things that are different from one another. Occupation is an activity in which a person is involved, especially as a way to earn money, a job, a role a person has in life. Reclaimed, it means to took something back that originally belonged to you, claimed again. Ultimately is an adverb, means in the end, as a result, finally. So far we have learned about the southern colonies and the New England colonies, and today we're going to start learning about the Middle Atlantic colonies. The English had now successfully established a number of colonies in North America. They were determined to claim more land, which is why in 1664 a fleet of English warships sailed into New Amsterdam Harbor, which is now the New York Harbor in New York City. England promptly claimed the harbor as its own. While they were at it, the English claimed the city and all the land around it too. This was particularly bold because not only were these areas already Dutch colonies, but Native Americans were living there as well. How and why did this happen? Let's go back in time to figure it out. This area was once named after the capital city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The adjective Dutch is used to refer to the people from the Netherlands. In 1609, Henry Hudson, we learned about him. Henry Hudson, the Englishman exploring for the Netherlands, set sail across the Atlantic Ocean on behalf of the Dutch East India Company. His destination was North America. Hudson, like many other explorers of the time, was searching for a northwestern water route to Asia, or what they called the Northwest Passage. Although Hudson did not find that route, he did find an area that is now part of the greater New York City area. When he arrived in this harbor, Hudson claimed it for the Netherlands. The harbor area was named New Amsterdam, and the colony was named New Netherlands. Hudson did, however, name the Hudson River after himself, and so a Dutch colony in North America was established. Before long, this Dutch colony began to develop an important fur trading center. Beaver fur was very popular in Europe, and Henry Hudson had noted there was an abundance in the area. It is believed by many historians that in 1624, Peter Minuit, the governor of this Dutch colony, purchased the island of Manhattan from a group of local Native Americans known as the Munsee in exchange for trade goods worth 60 guilders at the time. So that must be their type of currency, their type of money, guilders. A guilder was a unit of Dutch money, and 60 guilders was very little compared to the value of the land in Manhattan today. Because Native Americans did not share the Europeans' concept of private land ownership, historians are not sure whether the Native Americans understood what the Dutch thought they were purchasing. Nor are historians sure that the Dutch realized that it was the custom of some Native Americans to negotiate for trade goods in return for allowing others to pass through or temporarily inhabit the land upon which the natives were settled. So, historians aren't sure that the colonists or the Native Americans understood the type of agreement they were making. The Native Americans may have just thought that they were paying to let them rent the land, because Native Americans, a lot of them think that they don't own the land, they just use the land. Rather than create boundaries between the Native Americans and the colonists, these exchanges were meant to be the basis for continuing social connections between the groups. So it seems likely that both parties misunderstood the nature of the exchange. As a result, conflicts arose and continued between the colonists and the Native Americans in this region just as they had in other regions. As the Dutch colony continued to expand, it began to attract more Europeans. The colony allowed for certain religious freedom, so people who were not very happy with the leaders of their churches began to leave their homes and arrive in the New World. This colony had excellent land for farming and a growing fur trade. The English had set their sights on this area too. For quite some time, they had concentrated or focused on establishing colonies to the north and south of what is now New York, but in 1664 they turned their attention to this area. At this time in England, Charles II was king. His father, Charles I, had been killed because he was not well liked by the people, and Charles II had been forced to lead England. Later in 1660, Charles II was invited to return and become king. If you remember, Charles II had acquired or built up a great deal of debt. This happened during the 10 years that he had been living in exile. During this time, Charles II had borrowed an enormous amount of money from his friends. It's not easy to live like a king when you are not actually recognized as one. Excuse me. When Charles II reclaimed his throne, he looked to North America to solve his debt problems. As you know, he had already given land that did not belong to him in the South to several of his loyal friends. You might ask, why didn't he give away parts of England? Well, because that was against English law. There was no such law in place to protect the land in North America, and Charles believed he was entitled to claim this land. Charles II based this belief on the fact that John Cabot had explored North America for England back in the late 1400s, well before Henry Hudson had done so for the Dutch in the early 1600s. King Charles II put his brother James in charge of coming up with a plan to take New Netherlands from the Dutch. In 1664, James, also known as the Duke of York, sent a number of warships to New Amsterdam harbor. The Dutch had been taken by surprise. Not only was New Amsterdam poorly defended, but the townspeople did not particularly like this overbearing governor at the time. Peter Stuyvesant, the governor, is who they didn't like. Peter Stuyvesant. They were unwilling to risk their lives for him against the English, so Peter Stuyvesant had no choice but to surrender. And so the Duke of York had carried out his mission without firing a single shot. King Charles II was very pleased indeed. Although the Dutch did try to take their colony back several times, they were ultimately unsuccessful, and by 1669, the area was officially deemed an English colony. In honor of the Duke of York, New Amsterdam became known as New York City, and New Netherlands was now the colony of New York. Not wanting to be too greedy and ever grateful to loyal supporters of the monarchy, the Duke of York gave the southern part of the colony of New York to two of his good friends. These friends were George Carteret and John Berkeley. This area later became known as New Jersey, named after the Isle of Jersey in the English Channel. Soon after, the English took an area known as Delaware away from the Dutch too. So the English had now established colonies in three distinct regions. The southern colonies, which were made up of Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. The New England colonies, made up of Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. And the middle colonies, made up of New York, New Jersey, and the soon-to-be Pennsylvania and Delaware. The population in the middle colonies grew rapidly. These colonies attracted not only English people, but people from many other European countries too. In fact, the population in all of the English colonies grew, and within 100 years after King Charles II reclaimed his throne, the population would grow to be 2 million. Two of the most populous cities in North America at this time were located in the Middle Atlantic region, New York City and Philadelphia. These cities grew into bustling commercial centers with large populations. They're still big cities today. People who moved to the middle colonies from another country brought with them their own individual language, culture, and range of skills. The people who settled in the middle colonies were particularly diverse or varied. You can imagine hundreds of new arrivals speaking different languages, wearing different kinds of clothing, building different types of homes, and eating many different kinds of foods. Despite their differences, however, the people who moved to North America all had one thing in common: they wanted a better life. There were also many different reasons people chose to come to the middle colonies. One was that this region had good harbor areas and long, wide rivers. The English knew that this region would be good for trade. Another reason some people were drawn to the middle colonies was that the people in the charge of governing those colonies were generally tolerant of people's religions. For the most part, the day to day decisions were made by elected officials in town and county assemblies in the middle colonies. However, the Duke of York, George Carteret, and John Berkeley were ultimately in charge. Another reason people moved to the middle colonies was because it was a good area in which to farm. The climate and soil in the middle colonies compared to the north and south were perfect for farming. In terms of climate, it was neither too hot nor too cold. Wheat grew well in these conditions. As a result, these middle colonies earned the name the breadbasket because they could grow a lot of wheat and supply large amounts of flour to England as well as to other English colonies, particularly in the West Indies. Many mills were built in this region to grind the wheat into flour. The flour is packaged and exported. Other crops such as rye, potatoes, peas, and flax also thrived. Farming became the main occupation or job. There were other occupations too. There was also a need for sailors, trappers, lumbermen, merchants, and craftsmen. Shipbuilding became an important industry too. There were some enslaved Africans in the middle colonies, just as there were in the southern colonies. Unlike the southern colonies, people in the middle colonies rap- used the rapidly growing population as their main source of workers, and they paid them wages. As a result, there was less dependence on slavery than in the South. Builders were needed in the middle colonies too. People built houses of different styles, often reflecting the culture of their homeland. Networks of roads, though very basic, were slowly developing. The Great Wagon Road became an important highway stretching from Pennsylvania south through Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. Workshops, stores, and coffee shops were opening. Thanks to an English king who needed money, a vibrant new culture was emerging 3,000 miles away. Which two middle colonies did you hear about today? New York and New Jersey. How did the Dutch acquire Manhattan Island, which is part of New York City today? In 1624, Peter Minuit thought he purchased the land from the Munsee Native Americans. Were the Native Americans in agreement about the nature of this exchange? Historians believe that the Native Americans may have been intending to build a long term exchange relationship with the Dutch, rather than handing over the land to them for so few goods. Historians suspect that both groups misunderstood the nature of the exchange. How did the English acquire the Dutch colony of New Netherlands and all of its settlements, including New Amsterdam? Charles II put his brother James, the Duke of York, in charge of taking New Netherlands from the Dutch. In 1664, the Duke of York sent a number of warships, and the Dutch surrendered. What did the English ultimately rename the colony? In honor of the Duke of York, New Netherlands became the colony of New York, and New Amsterdam became New York City. What were some of the reasons the Dutch as well as the English wanted colonies in the New World? They wanted religious freedom, to take advantage of the rich farmland, to pursue commercial opportunities in the fur trade, and more. Describe other factors that shaped life in the middle colonies. There was fertile soil and a temperate climate, allowing for plentiful agriculture. Good harbors and long, wide rivers facilitated immigration and trade. Religious tolerance attracted people from many countries and resulted in a diverse culture. How was the colony of New Jersey founded? The Duke of York gave the southern part of the colony of New York to his two good friends, George Carteret and John Berkeley. They named this area New Jersey after the Isle of Jersey in the English Channel. Why were the middle colonies called the breadbasket? Because of the middle colonies' favorable climate, they grew a lot of wheat and were able to supply flour to England as well as to other English colonies, including the West Indies. Our word of the day is dependence. In the read aloud, you heard that because of the rapidly growing population in the middle colonies, there were many available workers and consequently much less dependence on slavery than in the South. Say the word dependence. Dependence means reliance on someone or something for support or help or a need for someone or something. Children have a dependence on adults to take care of them. Human beings have a dependence on food, water, and air in order to live. Crops have a dependence on good soil, sunlight, and water in order to thrive. The colonies had a dependence on goods imported from England. The English had a dependence on timber and wheat from the colonies. Okay, I'm going to say two words in a word pair. If there's dependence between the objects or people, you're going to say that there's dependence. If there's not dependence, you're going to say it's not an example of dependence. All right, what about the relationship between plants and rain? This is an example of dependence. Car and gas. That is an example of dependence. Successful restaurant and good food. That is an example of dependence. You're not going to have a successful restaurant if you don't have good food. Cinderella and a fairy godmother. That is an example of dependence, right? Cinderella depended on her fairy godmother to help her. Winning an Olympic medal, years of hard work and practice. That is an example of dependence. An infant and a cheeseburger. That is not an example of dependence. You should not be giving a cheeseburger to a baby. All right, so you should fill this out about the mid-Atlantic colonies that we talked about. So you can choose New York and talk about some of the key people, the important dates, the geography, what their motivations were, why did they want to be there, the major cities, right? New York City is one of them. What did you find the most interesting fact and things that you would like to know more about? Good job, third graders.